it's really just for me a full circle moment to see you today, and to have seen your film, Predators, which premiered at Sundance. But typical Sundance, I couldn't make the premiere, but I saw it at DC Doc,
Hmm.
which is also just an amazing festival for all of you who are interested in documentaries. Don't go to Sundance. It's crazy. It's expensive. It's impossible. But smaller festivals like DC Docs are really amazing ways to see like the best films of the year in much more easy to access circumstances. And that's where I saw David's film um, Predators. And one of the reasons why it was such an important film, just for me personally, is working at the intersection of journalism and documentary for so many years, to see you interrogating just the whole act of nonfiction storytelling,
Hmm.
um, I think is really meaningful and important. I think too often people slice and dice all forms of storytelling, including fiction storytelling, as sort of having different rules, different ethics. But I think at the end of the day, what why I think uh, your new film is so resonant is that it's really just about both storytellers and audiences
Hmm.
at a super high level, and asking ourselves as watchers and of makers, like, what are we doing here?
Hmm.
And why are we here? Um, so to start delving into your film, and I was just telling David before we started, like, I've really gone deep on prepping for this interview. So I just want to apologize in advance. I do have notes in front of me.
That's all right.
Um,
If you're gonna have nose in front of you, then I'm gonna get a cup of water to have in front of me.
oh
So
yeah, please get water.
let me
I'm
do
also
that fast
going to
while you give
your
people an
subject.
intro. While you give
Okay.
people an intro of everything, I can go get water.
Okay. Perfect. Perfect. So just to set up the film for everyone who hasn't seen it, it basically investigates To Catch a Predator, the NBC show that came out in 2003. So thinking back to that moment, the internet was a new thing, people chatting online anonymously, all of that was just starting to hit the culture at the same time that there were a plethora of nightly TV shows or more TV magazines. So not the nightly news, but like 2020, Dateline, that would take stories and give them more time and space to evaluate and investigate them. And in that moment, To Catch a Predator was born as a show that basically the concept was a group called Perverted Justice would chat online in chat rooms and find men who were interested in sex with minors. And then they would be invited to come and meet with that minor. But really, what it was is they were coming to meet a film crew and television journalist Chris Hansen for interrogation, first with Chris and then with the police waiting outside. And one interesting note, the men never knew the police were waiting outside. Um,
Unless they'd watched the show.
That's true, which later on did happen. So just so everyone knows, the film is right now available in theaters nationwide, and it will be coming to streaming. Do you have a date on that, David?
Well, it's just opened in New York on Friday. It'll be coming to theaters this coming Friday in California, and then we're expanding to more theatrical markets as the next couple of weeks go on.
Great, great. So for those of you that obviously haven't seen the film, I won't give away spoilers. Um, and if I start to, David, if I start to get into anything you want me to mention, like feel free to cut me off. But at a very high level, to me, the central question of the film is, can entertainment be a public service?
Mm.
And and then as we're looking at that, also asking, is there necessarily harm when that happens? Is there necessarily harm when shows about crimes are made into entertainment? Or is there a way that shows about crime can be both entertaining and a public service at the same time. So, one of the things I love about your film, and let's start here, is I feel like you're asking those questions. Can entertainment be a public service, both about To Catch a Predator and to the film yourself?
Mhm.
So, my first question for you is just about To Catch a Predator. Did you, as a viewer of the show, did you see it as an instrument of justice? And if you did, who is it for?
I think the show saw itself as an instrument of justice. When I was seeing it, I was just a 19-year-old, and which is the way a lot of people engaged with it. We were just audiences for it. The show, look, some of the context you gave some of the context for the show, but one thing that's important to note, I think, is that this show was a hit. This show was ubiquitous appointment television in 2004, 5, 6, 7, mostly 5, 6, and 7. Everyone knew it. It was on less than 20 times over 3 years, and it still has name recognition. People still 20 years ago know what it is. Kids still know what it is. 80-year-olds know what it is. So I can think of very few things that have that name recognition that's a generation on. I was just doing an interview, and I was trying to think of anything else, and I was like, Roots? Like, maybe Roots? Like, the Alex Haley miniseries might have that, like, in terms of something that aired for, like, that many episodes but left such a cultural imprint. A little bit different than Roots, but kind of that kind of, impact on people in that it really felt just seismic and generational when it was on TV, especially for a younger audience like myself, who grew up with the internet. 2004, 5, 6, everyone's fluent in the internet at that point, even though it's a generation ago, but social media didn't exist. So we still interacted with each other in real life, but we would have these like really anonymous and weird interactions with each other on the internet. So the show was huge, and the outcrop of it being on TV and being on TV as a news program was that you're not really asking questions morally about, oh, is this show doing something unethical in terms of entrapping predators or something like that? Those questions didn't exist in 2004 or 5 or 6 because the show was wrapped in the veneer of journalism. And unlike now, journalism back then didn't feel like it was just a something that was waiting to be fused with law enforcement to create entertainment. And that's of course where we are now, and I think you see a lot of people not trusting journalism anymore, partly because we feel as though journalism has become something that's designed for entertainment in many ways, and we find ourselves being entertained by the act of journalism at this point in time. But 20 years ago, uh, this was just a PSA. It was just a public service announcement on TV, and it just kept airing over and over again, and we kept watching over and over again, and no one thought much of it. And but I think it's important to put it into context of what this show meant for people at the time. It wasn't seen as anything but a public service. A lot of people who are in the film, there's a moment in the film where we have like talk show hosts and pundits, uh, Jimmy Kimmel, one of them, Jon Stewart. These are two people who are pretty adamant about talking about sort of righteousness and moral causes and freedom of speech and protecting, the people who need protection. They love the show. They're talking about how much they love the show and how much they're entertained by the show and how they wish they could see more of it. Jon Stewart at one point says to Chris Hansen, "You should have your own channel doing this show." So that was the time we lived in, and no longer.
Yeah, and because the show is basically the aim of the show is it's service journalism, as you're saying, and it's to educate the public about this new threat of child child abusers who are online that can reach your children. So the
Yeah.
point of the show was sort of show what was happening. People didn't know it was so easy, didn't know how it was going to work. So in many ways, the aim of the show couldn't be more pure, literally to protect children from being sexually abused. Like there's, I think there's very few topics that literally everyone in the world across culture, across time would agree that that is a very important aim. So, as you were coming back to the show and, you've talked about in other interviews, yourself working in documentary and with the rise of true crime and making your living as a doc editor at doing true crime. At what point did your work in the true crime genre remind you of that show? Or is that something that has always been something you've been thinking about over the years?
Yeah. It wasn't my work in the genre that reminded me of the show. I think I don't know why the show always well, the show I wouldn't argue the show was always in my consciousness. It was clearly in my unconscious for many years. Because I remember watching the show, forgetting about the show. Years later, I remember hearing about how the show ended. I came across an Esquire article that was talking about how there was an episode of the show where something bad
Mhm.
happened, which we'll get into later, I'm sure. And I still wasn't thinking at that point. It wasn't like a eureka light bulb. I've got to go make a movie about that thought just to hear about how it ended because endings aren't interesting to me as a filmmaker. Like I'm not interested in hearing about how something ended. There's no questions, and I couldn't think of any questions in the idea of covering how the show had a dark moment and then it ended, and so I wasn't thinking about it very much. And then it was it wasn't my work as in true crime that made me remember the show. It was something else that made me think about making the film, which was that I found all this raw footage online. I found this not a huge amount, but a pretty amazing amount of footage from the show that a small and very passionate fan base of the show for 20 years had been collecting through FOIA requests, depositions, footage from interrogation rooms, footage from the show itself, footage from defense packages. And it was amazing watching that material because it really contrasted with what I remembered of the show. It was much more emotional, much more fraught. I felt bad for the guys. I did feel that way when I remember watching the show when I was younger. And then I would really dig in and go back and forth and try to watch things back and back. I'd watch the raw footage that then was cut to make an episode. I noticed the differences in the editing. It started to appeal to my filmmaking brain. And I realized that the edited material of the show, ironically, had much less emotional integrity to it. I mean integrity. I don't mean moral integrity. I mean emotional integrity. Like I felt less integration of my emotional experience watching the edited show versus the raw footage, which felt like watching like slow cinema, like Simon Liang film or something. Like just sitting in these long takes for a long time and with myself for company. And so that's when I thought about making the film because I felt like there was something here where I could look at how true crime gets made and what it does and the flattening that can happen underneath it.
I think that this brings me to the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is editing. Because basically, the process of taking raw footage and turning it into something, as you know better than anyone, does not happen in a vacuum. It's not like you look at raw footage and it's like, oh, there's a story. We just need to take out some things so it's 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
The act of editing is very intentional and it's very specific. And in many ways, there is nothing that's more full of bias than taking raw footage and editing it into a scene or a movie. So, talk to me about your intentions as you looked at that raw footage in terms of what did you go in looking for or thinking you would see? And then what did you end up seeing? And what does that say about the ultimate result, both of the show itself, but then starting to get into more on your movie, the way the sort of your intention as an editor and as a director, as you were putting together this movie that really at its core is
Mhm.
about questioning who stories are for and whose justice is being put at the forefront. Because on To Catch a Predator, it's about justice for children. It's about
Mhm.
protecting them from being abused. But as so talk to me about the raw footage and how you saw actually a different story from really the same source material.
Well, you brought up so many wonderful points, all of which came later. Because, but all extremely important nodes on that journey that I would end up going on. I mean, you basically described the journey I would ultimately go on when it came to thinking about that material. But at the beginning, I'm interested. I mean, it's kind of almost a filmmaking question, so I'll answer it as such. I feel like at the beginning, I'm looking for what gives me something unexpected, what gives me an unexpected emotional experience. I look for that and I try to find it. And then I try to think about it and I try to talk about it and I try to give it to an audience instead. And that for me is what I was looking for in the raw footage, but I wasn't thinking about editing the film when I was just watching the raw footage. I was just thinking about how I wanted to make the film. And down the road at some point, a year or two later, I started to think about how I would turn it into a movie. But at the time, I just wanted to see if other people would have that experience too, not just random people, but people who worked on the show or who were involved in the show. I wanted to see if people who were, for example, my age, who also worked on the show, as in the decoys, who I feature in the film, and they're the first people we really meet in the movie, the people who were 19 years old, 18 years old, 20 years old, playing 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds, who were my age when the show was airing. How'd they feel about watching the raw footage again or watching the show again? I'm not even sure. I didn't show any raw footage to the decoys early on in the first few shoots I did. But I did think to myself it would be really interesting to revisit how they feel about their role in this show all these years later, now that we're all in a different society and we're all living differently and thinking differently. What would their response be, and what do they remember from the show? What was it like? So my early interviews were kind of more fact finding for me, and so it's so funny. So much of this film was linear. I've never made a film, especially because most of my films before this were verite films. I've never made a film that mirrored so much the actual chronology of what I filmed. It's filmed like a dogma movie. Like there's so many things that like some of the first things you see in the film are some of the first things I filmed. Some of the last things you see in this film are some of the last things I filmed. The stuff in the middle is stuff I filmed in the middle. It's not there's not a lot of deviation, but there's a tremendous amount of consideration in terms of how I would structure it based on your emotional experience watching.
It's really it's really a dismantling of something that seemed so narratively clear and unassailable, which was the premise of To Catch a Predator.
Mhm.
And then you start to find the chinks. So it you really start to so for you when you saw the raw footage and you started to feel this sort of different way about the men than you did watching the show, and then next you came to really want to talk to the people trying to make it, um, there's
Can
there's
I
a
interrupt for a
moment.
moment? Sorry. I just want to just to be clear. I didn't start to feel a different way about the men. It was more that I started like they became human beings
Mm,
when I watched the raw footage. Like they became humans. I
yeah.
noticed I started to feel differently about the show. I started to feel differently around what does it mean to tie this up in a bow when it comes to this type of crime, this indefensible, awful crime that these men were all accused of committing. And then I started to think about the crime itself that they were committing, which was, as far as the law was concerned, having an online chat with a child. And then I started to think about how the circumstances of that crime could come to place, which is that the show and the people who were doing the online chat room stuff with these men, they made it very appealing to them. For some, like if you wanted to have a sexual experience with a child, the show wanted to make sure that you feel like that was something that could happen. And that's why the men would come to the house. It's not entrapment. Entrapment's complicated. Like, there's lots of people who are out there saying the word entrapment. Entrapment's a legal defense that you use. Like, it's not as clear cut as the show was entrapment. I'm sitting here saying I have problems with the show, and I'm still saying that entrapment's way more complicated than that. And it's it's a it was um it was encouraging a crime, and that became interesting to me. So that's what changed for me, is thinking about how does this television show that is basically a film set that's designed to end people's lives, how does this television show have any moral accountability? for the actions that it's taking for not only the people being caught, but it being extrajudicial at times in terms of the work being done to look at these men. But no accountability to the public because it's entertaining and it's journalism at the same time. No accountability really to police because they weren't running the investigations. And then um, no accountability to the idea of is there a world where these men are not necessarily just met by law enforcement, but through like some sort of rehabilitative lens. And that wasn't in the consciousness at all at the time of the show airing. And so I started thinking about those questions, and that's what changed for me, and that's what propelled most of my investigation.
So where the film really starts to take a turn is when we get to that episode where one of the men who's connected with one of the children ends up committing suicide during the production of the episode. And sort of up until then, it's really about what you've been saying, like kind of looking at how at the time we all just took this for granted as viewers and as the people making it, that like this is something we should be doing. But you interview someone in that sequence that honestly like brought me to tears. You interviewed a man named Walt Weiss, who was a detective, right?
Hmm.
Can you talk about who Walt was and his role in the films? It's sort of like with him that things really shift because he at the time knew something was wrong and didn't do anything, which is such a common feeling, that something bad is happening and you don't do anything about it, either small or large. And he starts to talk about what he could have done. He says, I could have shut that thing down by going out the door and going to see somebody.
Hmm.
And then he says, I don't know what else I have to tell you, but if you have more questions, I will sit for them. And then you see him watching the show in
Hmm.
real time. You film him, he's watching it, you're behind. But a choice that I thought was so fascinating that you made in that moment is when the segment ends, you don't
Hmm.
cut.
Hmm.
You the segment ends and then you see a promo
Hmm.
and for what's coming up next. And
Hmm.
there's going to be something about how Britney just got out of rehab. And then you find out Jay Leno has a guest coming up who smashes watermelons with his head.
Yeah.
Walt says, "Good God."
Hmm.
Talk to me about that sequence in the film, because I just think that's really where sort of like the wave builds and then it crashes and it just opens up this whole new perspective on
Hmm.
everything we've just been seeing.
I mean, you answered it. Like that's why it's there. Precisely because of that. Because it's couching this segment that airs. I mean, basically the what the one little part that you left out is it's NBC kind of doing like reportage on what happened that with that episode, which you can, if you see the film, those of you watching, I won't spoil it here in terms of what happens. But basically, the NBC reports on what happened this on this fateful day, and then they do a promo for the next episode of To Catch a Predator, which is on NBC. And Joe Scarborough, the host, is like, "Wow, that's crazy stuff." And then you can watch the next episode this Sunday. Um, and then it also goes on to have, this clip about Britney Spears, which, 20 minutes earlier in the film, we're hearing someone talk about how this show existed in the context of sexualization of young girls, and this is, of course, the show really kind of also using sexualization of young people to titillate. And there are times when it's minorly pornographic in terms of the show having you imagine kind of what some of these conversations are, and the show airing chat logs and saying things like the chat logs were so illicit we can't even bring them up here, and having actors act out the chats between these men and these young girls or these young boys. And so it gets into some really sketchy areas, but again, you can kind of enjoy it however you want to. If you're watching at home, or you can learn from it, or you can have this sort of your own emotional experience with what you're seeing. You can relate to the police, you can relate to the decoys. Some people obviously related to the predators because people would show up to future episodes and stings and say, I watch the show. I watch it all the time. So it wasn't deterring anybody necessarily. It was people watch these shows because it's safe to watch these shows, and then you sit at home and you feel better, and you're fine. So anyway, point being, that segment and that series in the film is just it came in the context of archival research. When I ordered the clip, and you get a full TV hour when you order a clip from certain websites, and I'm looking for it, and I'm watching, and I see that this thing that's coming next is it's just more entertainment, I guess. Um, and it was all in a news program, and it's this guy with watermelons and stuff about Britney, and it just made sense. It was just part of the world, part of the ecosystem of this movie is that it takes place in the world.
It sure does. And in fact, we then go on to meet Skeet Hansen, who's a modern day uh cat in a modern day sleuth trying to find these guys, and does a YouTube show about it. Um in terms of and then and then and then you coming in to even make this movie, like at this point in the film, we sort of see like people who make To Catch a Predator who think it's great, people who worked on the show who now regret it, someone who was involved at the time who started to ask questions, and now we see people continuing it to do now. At this point in the film, what do you what is the where are you in all of this as a filmmaker, as you're sort of showing us all of these threads? What I mean, it almost there's a scene where you when you're with Skeet, where one of your producers asks one of the men to sign a release. And in that moment, it's like the idea that we're watching a documentary and you're watching a documentary about this comes back up. Like, talk to me about that. The release thing, we can get in the details of that, but I think more sort of philosophically,
Mhm.
where were you at that moment in making the film?
So I'm making a film that up to this point, as far as an audience understands, and then really as far as I understand, is about To Catch a Predator and the lineage of the show, and then where it goes and where it leads. And naturally makes sense that I follow a guy who 20 years later is imitating Chris Hansen and calls himself Skeet Hansen, and is wearing the suit and has the binders with the chat logs and a deep, sonorous, calm interrogation voice, all as Chris had when he would do the show. And there are lots of online predator hunters doing this, and all of them are more popular than the original show ever was, by far. It's much more popular now, and it was all kind of coming from this lineage of To Catch a Predator. But now everyone can make their own content the same way that you and I are cutting out the satellite news at the moment, right? Like, so it's everyone's just can do that, and so some people have done it, and then they get lots of views and revenue and income. And uh, I I'm just remembering a line that I cut from the film that I haven't thought about in a really long time, which is when Skeet says that he makes six figures doing this. Uh, I think it's helpful for people to know that it's not a hobby for him; it's a job. Um, and so I'll go and re-edit the film later. It's fine. But anyway, I felt like I remember thinking, okay, like I've got to spend time with the guy who does this,
Mhm.
who's like the next generation of Skeet, of Chris Hansen rather. And then how do I film what he's well, I should film what he's doing. So maybe we should go on a sting. So I'm just doing all the documentary stuff
Mhm.
at this point. I'm doing the things that you do when you make a documentary. and I'm like putting that in kind of invisible air quotes. I'm like doing the thing. You're supposed to go out and film what your person does because kind of then you show what he's doing, and who would think twice? And then I'm filming on the stings, and I start to realize pretty quickly that I find it deeply uncomfortable to be there, and it took me a really long time to articulate why. But I think it was important to explain at depth what led me there, which was the impulse of being a documentary filmmaker and thinking that my job is to capture things. And all of a sudden, I found myself, filming a sting where Skeet was, doing this, and we were in a hotel room and filming the men showing up. And what I did is, in my mind's eye, I left my body and imagined how this anonymous guy who we caught, and I say we because I was there filming too, and the camera was present, which meant that we were part of the unit of the spectacle. And I tried to imagine what this guy would be thinking, and I imagine that he's looking up and he sees two cameras on him, and one of them's mine, and one of them is Skeet's. And in that moment, does he think there's any difference between us? And in that moment, is there a difference between us? And I didn't know, and I may have found that to be a very uncomfortable thought, and that's what inspires the rest of the scene, which you've noted with the release form, and it's it's a scene that I'm sure will be asked about many times over the course of my filmmaking career because it's a challenging scene to watch, and some people don't know exactly what to take from it because there's not one thing to take from it. And I think we're really used to documentary giving us just one takeaway,
Mhm.
and it's far more complicated than that. That scene is far more complicated, but what it inspired it was my feelings of I have to do something here to peel back the layers and help you think about the way that this film is being made. And I don't know how yet, and I don't know what it's going to mean. This is my thinking in the moment. And I don't know how it's going to manifest yet, but I know I have to film everything I can related to the idea that this is a construct. And I have to focus on the ways in which Skeet and I are similar and the ways in which we're different. And I'll figure it out in the edit room.
Well, I mean, yeah, I really wanted to dig into Skeet because, I mean, sort of at this point in the film, there's sort of a pantheon of three people: you, Chris Hansen, and Skeet Hansen.
Mhm.
At that moment, how would you have felt you were similar or different? To like, is there a difference between each of you?
At which moment specifically?
When you were sitting there filming and sort of basically to just explain a little more for the audience, it really becomes clear that something that's happening is is deeply uncomfortable. It's not black and white. Um, who's that what's happening with the perpetrator, you don't feel as the audience like, oh, get the police, this guy's got to get out of there. It becomes more complicated. And even Skeet himself is like, very disingenuously says, "Oh, we're gonna help you. We're gonna, what does he say? That phrase, pull some favors or something
Pull
to
some
like help this
strings.
guy pull some strings." Like Skeet seems to be playing this whole character of someone who is searching for justice, who cares, who wants to help. But you also can tell that's not really what he's interested in. Whereas with Chris Hansen, TV journalist, you documentary filmmaker, where does Skeet fit in this sort of range, or is there not a range? Are all of you essentially the same?
I think there's a really interesting spectrum of where we all fall. Excuse me. But um, where do I start? Well, first of all, Skeet and Chris. What's the difference between them? Is that Skeet's um, not a journalist and doesn't pretend to be. He's pretending to be Chris Hansen, but he's not pretending to be a journalist, which is, chew on that one. But he's doing a bit for entertainment, and his lineage is YouTube comedy stuff, and he's making content, and he's making content that is also about catching bad guys who say gross things to kids, and Skeet and his people say the things, and it's gross, and he talks about uh, gross stuff with them while he's in character, and it's sad and it's disgusting, and he catches them, and the police won't work with him, so he blows them up, and he blows up their identity and talks about who they are, and so that's somewhere in there he becomes different than Chris Hansen, um, but it's just really the motivation that's different, uh, that's displayed. Like they're not that different from like on surface level, but Skeet doesn't purport to be respectable. He's not interested in kind of working with a news organization. I think I think he'd love to work with Chris. I don't think Chris would want to work with him, but I think that he sees himself as I think he sees Chris as the OG, and he sees himself as the next generation of this kind of work. So there's some differences and there's some similarities. And then there's me. And if there's a Venn diagram with all three of us, the one thing that you'd have in the middle is has a camera and believes that what they're doing is right. And that's the thing that all three of us have in common. And then there's spirals out from there. Would I make the same choices as Skeet and Chris about revealing someone's identity? I don't think so personally, and that's one of the interesting things I was starting to feel when I was asking for the release form. And I was thinking, why do I want it? Like what? Like what would I do? Maybe I'll follow up with him. Maybe I'll go to his house. Call him up, do an interview, ask him how this affected his life. Um, but it didn't mean I felt good doing it. But I also, in a weird way, was me trying to differentiate myself from Skeet because Skeet did not ask for a release form, and in that moment, and because he doesn't do that. Same reason that Chris didn't. So because this goes back to the original point is because the show in its origin was journalism, it was protected under journalistic intent, which meant they didn't collect release forms and all these things. But then the new version of the show kind of just is all these people doing this online. And of course, they're not also protected. They're not also getting release forms either, not because it's journalism, but because I think people realize that no one cares.
Mhm.
Like, no one cares if you get a release form from a child predator. What are they going to do? Sue you? Go to a court, say I'm accused as a child predator and you took my identity? Uh, of course not. Like, these people don't get the law's protection. They don't get privacy. We don't, as a society, believe that they deserve it. And that's how
Mhm.
we treat them.
Mhm. Mhm. And I think, yeah, I think for me, seeing the moment with the release as someone who's, been a documentary producer and
Mhm.
asked for releases, it's sort of this sort of ritual in our field of like, don't forget the release. Did you get the release? Oh, we didn't get it. Oh,
Right.
what needs to be on the release? Because it used to just be you needed someone to sign it. Now you need their age, their home address. I feel like over the last 20 years, I've also seen how releases have gotten so much more robust to the point where now, when you're delivering a film to a big distributor, they really want to know, do you have a location release? Who are these people? Where are they from? Because there's this huge concern about liability. And so it also speaks to the commercial value in a way of what documentary films are that are being sold, what Skeet is doing on YouTube, and then the sort of mantle of journalism that Chris takes on that I think is really worth noting here, because ironically, I'm sure Skeet makes more money than like 99% of all documentary filmmakers. Like,
Yeah.
he'd be a much better person to sue than us.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's, it's funny, but it's not funny.
It's not.
It's the release form is, of course, like a yeah, it's a gesture that, uh, in the context of the film is kinda hollow, and it's hard to describe it if you haven't seen it. Uh, but I would say it's the most complicated scene in the film, and there's no one answer to it. It's really designed to make you feel a certain way. It's designed in the film to make you feel a certain way about me. It's in the film to make you feel a certain way about Skeet and to interrogate what's happening on screen, which is, as the film goes on, I'd like to think the point of it is to offer a chance to interrogate how we watch things and how we feel about what we make and how we feel about the moral righteousness of a lot of documentary film that purports to be for good, uh, but often trades in the same kind of behavior that I'm critiquing on the show. And I can't critique it unless I can critique myself too. It's not a fair criticism otherwise.
Well, I feel like, there's so much in journalism talk about bias. And is this news outlet on the left or the right? Is this reporter like who's paying for this reporting? But I think sort of something your film really made me think about is the underdiscussed way in which I'm not even going to say filmmakers, I'm just going to say storytellers in fiction and nonfiction have incredibly powerful motivations that have nothing really to do with politics or money. They have to do with their personal backstories, their personal experiences.
Mhm,
And I won't, uh, and, and why they're doing what they're doing. And
mhm,
so one of the most, I think, clarifying moments in the film is where we hear from Chris about why he's doing this.
mhm,
What was the thing that motivated him to create Catch a Predator?
mhm.
Because I think that this so basically, Chris, before he was on To Catch a Predator, he was just run of the mill TV journalist. And he did a story about child trafficking
Yeah.
in, it was Burma, right?
Yes. Cambodia.
Cambodia, sorry. And he went to Cambodia, and he saw girls who were child prostitutes, 9, 10. Just, I mean, you see the footage, it's in the film, it's horrifying. And he sees an American man in Cambodia engaged in this, and with a hidden camera, gets him to talk about it. So it's clear the guy did it. He's a journalist. He went there, he saw victims, he saw the perpetrator, he made a story about it. He then found the guy, and he was a doctor, and he made this piece of television that was very powerful, got a huge response.
Mhm.
People came in to
It's his
help the
first
girls.
thing. Yeah.
And then, so basically he says that was sort of the inciting incident to make to catch a predator, because this is what we all want, to help people, to shine a light of injustice. And he has this thing of like, what I do has a greater purpose, which I think ultimately defines almost every journalist and documentary filmmaker, having a
Yeah.
greater purpose.
Yeah, look, I'll say 2 things about that moment. One, it's one of my favorite parts of the film because when I saw that footage of his investigation that predates To Catch a Predator by a year, when I saw that footage of his investigation in Cambodia, I'm watching and I'm like, "I have no problem with this.
Mhm.
I have no ethical problem with what I'm looking at." He's blowing up someone's identity, first and last name of a doctor who is doing this, breaking the law, talking about breaking the law, doing something awful, confronts him to embarrass him, films the embarrassment. So far, what's the difference between To Catch a Pre What is the difference? I couldn't put my finger on it, but I watched it and I was like, "I'm fine with this." So then what's the problem with To Catch a Predator? One felt like news. One felt like it was being repeated for the sake of entertainment. Maybe that's what the difference was. Was it the fact that it was incidentally funny, whereas To Catch a Predator endeavored to be? There were a bunch of things that I couldn't quite tell what the difference was, but I knew that somewhere in me I saw a line that existed, a entrenched, calcified line between what was right and what was wrong, and one thing crossed it and the other didn't. Everyone has a different line, and that was mine. Some people could watch that and still have a problem with it. Some people could watch To Catch a Predator and not have a problem with it. Doesn't mean we're bad people or good people. It means, like, what do we feel okay with doing and seeing about when it comes to, the display of the what's it called? Um the stockades in our society. And how do we fix a problem? How do we address a problem? How do we talk about a problem? And how do we meet that problem? And to be thinking about it that way was profound for me. And that scene was really meaningful as a result. It's always stayed with me. And I think it's a thing that's really important in the film because I think it helps you to understand where Chris comes from, where another journalist could come from, where I come from. There's moments in the film where you understand what animates me as well as a filmmaker, and they're more subtle, but they're just as prominent, in terms of how I kinda wish all documentaries had a thought bubble above them and kinda made you think about why they exist. But the thing is, more often than not, documentaries, I think, are allowed to be made by anonymous filmmakers with anonymous motivations, and so you don't have to think about the morality of their existence because they just exist, and we're just gonna watch them. And we get to watch them and feel good afterwards or feel bad. Sometimes we just wanna feel bad. Like, there are really popular documentaries that just make you feel awful about the world, but there's you like that rage. You want that rage. Um, you wanna be angry at climate change or George W. Bush or like or what's happening with some racist dude who's doing some shitty thing, or some racist lady who's doing some shitty thing, or like we wanna be angry. We wanna see that, and we wanna see them get punished. So we're not that different.
And I think this is where what we're talking about right now to me is so important because, there's been many narratives in all forms of nonfiction storytelling where the goal is to shine a light on injustice, to make people feel angry, make people feel motivated. But I think we all have to be honest that has failed. The narrative of the climate movement, to me, is a very important example. For the last 25 years, they've been telling us we need to do something about climate change or we're all going to die. And guess what? That didn't work. It
I
didn't
don't
work.
think that a movie can change the world, and I think I used to feel that way when I was, like,
Mhm.
18.
Of
But movies can't
course.
change the world. They can change a person. They can
Yeah.
change, but I don't think they can even change someone's mind that much. I think I think they can just trouble you. I think they can just change your soul. I think they can just change something ineffable. I think they can just change the way you look at something. I think they can just haunt you. I think they can do those little things. I think that's what the arts do. And I think that at the core of movies trading in an emotional experience, uh, and a documentary is doing that. And I think the documentaries that try to educate or inform are the ones that I think have this presumption that they can do the thing you're talking about. That if we watch enough of this film about climate change, that we will change the climate back. Uh, I don't mean to say that people can't organize around film, but Ken Loach said it really well once with regards to this. Who's been making films um about people who are disenfranchised and collective power for years. Is that a film can add its voice to outrage, but a film is not the vehicle. A film is not the car that you all get in. It's what you show on the screens inside of the car.
I totally agree. But just to push back, I would say if our goal is to, you know, just inform, just shine a light, not inspire any kind of action, right? Like that's asking too much. That essentially means not very many people want to engage with this type of storytelling. And then you see the types of stories that do get mass audience is the ones that are entertaining, that
Mhm.
everyone wants to watch.
Yeah.
And so they take in many times you could take a story and do the entertaining version and do the like eat your vegetables, shine a light version. This exact same story. But the one that's entertaining is the one that people will see and react to much more. So I feel like there's this gap um, between telling stories that simply shine a light, that don't make much of a splash once they land, and films that make a splash. So I feel like the question for us, because you and me, I think you would agree, we're idealistic documentary filmmakers that want to keep doing this and think it's important. I also think it's incumbent upon us to figure out ways to tell stories that do all the good things we want them to do,
Mhm.
but that can also resonate. And I do think that's one of the reasons why Predators is successful is I think you Trojan horsed it. I mean, I want to kill myself every time I say that, but because it's about a pop culture phenomenon, which everyone remembers to catch a predator, it's going to bring people to the film. And then you've got the people because it's entertaining. And then you get them to think and ask
Mhm.
complicated questions. And in many ways, I feel that's kind of the best we can do, right? But I think it's important to, especially in a moment where there's not a lot of money for films, there's not a lot of ways to even get them seen, to really ask ourselves, how can we tell important stories about climate change, racism, injustice, uh, in a way that people want to watch? I mean, I don't know how much that inspires your work. I mean, I'm sure it
I mean,
inspires work.
the irony to me is, I mean, that's exactly the question that animates To Catch a Predator, and that's kind of the point of my film.
Mhm.
That's where we are. Yeah, and I think that it's not an indictment of what you're saying, it's an acknowledgment of it. This is the way we watch things, this is the way we consume things. I think there's no such thing as ethical consumption. These are products, and we're making them as products, and we hope people engage with them, and we hope that the films sell or get seen, and that's great. Like, that's fine. That's not new. Not since the printing press is it new to want people to engage with art in some way, um, or to create a career out of making that art. But anything that's for profit is corruptible. And I think we've now seen a full movement in that within the journalism that we used to admire.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that as
And for what it's worth, sorry to interrupt, but the only thing
yeah,
I'm
no,
really
please.
trying to say is with the film. I mean, the only thing I'm really trying to say is that I I think somewhere along the line of making this film, I wanted to say that I'm corruptible too. Like, we are too. I'm tired of the documentaries that pretend they're not. That's really it.
Yeah, I mean, we're all complicit in capitalism. It's the water we breathe and the air we drink. I mean, there's sort of no way to live outside of that. I guess what see happening in your film is you trying to reckon with that and ask, is there an ethical way to make movies in a capitalist framework? Um, because looking at your resume, I know you've also worked as an editor, which for those who don't know is like the best job in documentary film because it's pretty stable and remunerative if you're good at your job, unlike being a producer or even a director.
This
Um,
is
yeah, like I think that would actually be interesting for you to kind of unpack, like just sort of like just the reality. Like you have a family, like can you just make whatever documentary film you want to make? In fact, do you think you should be able to just make whatever film you make? Are you entitled to that?
I don't I mean this with respect, but I don't even know what that means,
I mean,
Like
I just mean
like
like
what I mean is I don't know what that mean like, to be entitled to make something. I've never
Mm,
understood what that
yeah,
means.
I haven't either.
I don't think I'm entitled to anything. I don't think anyone's entitled to anything. It's like to say it's the same kind of question, not to get a little political on your podcast or Substack, whatever, but, like, when people are like, "Does Israel have the right to exist?" I'm like, "When countries don't have the right to that's not a thing. Countries
Yeah.
don't people barely have the right to exist. You know, that it's up to some it's like but, like, I never understood that dynamic. Like, what am I entitled to? Like, I don't nothing. Nothing none of us are we're just atoms, you know, and we're just trying to build a society out of our atoms. I mean, I'm just trying to make work that I believe in, and that I hope reveals some higher emotional truths that make me think differently about what I consume. I feel like making this film made me more empathetic, made me more thoughtful, and made me more understanding of people that I disagree with. And it also made me more certain that I'm uncertain. And I kind of wish more of us were that more uncertain.
Yes, I agree. I am a big fan of questions, not so much of answers. And I think ultimately, like what you're really talking about is like, is there a way, just thinking about evolution, our DNA only can get replicated if we survive, which means we need to have food on the table. And the only way we can do that is through money. And how that money is obtained is a very complex question to which there is no answer. But in the context of your career, what I'm trying to understand from you is how you sort of walk that path between figuring out a way to work with integrity and also put food on the table.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I'm an expert at it. And that's, I think, what the film's about in some ways for me is this is my I think there's an argument to be made for someone who could pretty easily say, well, just because you're pointing the finger at yourself doesn't let you off the hook
Mhm.
of the things that you're trying to say and do. And that's completely fair. Uh, I try to be kind. I try to not hurt anybody with the work that I make. I'm not sure of more of a moral code that I can follow. And and there's a few other things I try to do. I try to not work with organizations that are interested in disenfranchising populations of people, particularly Palestinian. Um, I try to uh, not um, let people kind of put factually untrue things in my film without challenging them on them. I have like my own code. The thing is that we all have our own code. That's the problem. there's there's no way to be a journalist, and there's certainly no way to be a documentary filmmaker. It's as Congress once said in like the mid 2000s, it's a made up profession, and it's kind of a hobbyist profession. You know, 30 years ago, the only people doing this stuff was like independently wealthy people. And we're really kind of back to that now. Like the grants are going away and the organizations, the nonprofits, they're going away. It's just becoming again, I am not independently wealthy. And I'm fortunate that this film was made. And that I've had a good career at this point and I'm able to get support for the work that I'm making at times, but I've also made films on shoestring budgets, and I'm also just trying to do the best I can. And I'm also, like just been doing this for a while now. But like we're it's just again because this comes back to like what's ethically responsible. It's anyone's. It, there's no like truth about that. It's just can we feel good about what we've done? And as Chris says, you know, I'll take any criticism.
Oh, yeah. We didn't talk about that. But yeah, that's an amazing moment in the
We'll have
film.
to save that for the next one because I have to go pick up my
Yeah.
kids.
Well, thank you so much. I really, really appreciate this. This was a wonderful conversation. It's a wonderful film. Everyone has to see it. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much, Kathleen, and see you in a couple of days in San Francisco, and in LA. The film opens on Friday.
Great. Great.
Thanks.
I'll send out, and everyone, I'll send out my next Substack with this interview and also more information on the film and where you can see it. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll meet you in the theater watching David's film soon.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.